The starship, Eclipse, drifts silently in the void, its hull glinting faintly against the endless dark. Inside, Captain Elara Voss stirs, her eyes fluttering open as the Cryosleep chamber hisses and releases her into the cold air of the ship. Her mind races to catch up. Where is she? Why has the ship awakened her now? The answers come slowly, fragments of a mission she once knew by heart. Her task, to explore the forgotten planets beyond the edge of known space, worlds so distant and mysterious that even the most advanced star charts barely whisper their names. But as Alara revives her crew, a chilling discovery awaits. A cryptic message from her predecessor, Captain Thorn, flickers on the console, its words etched with urgency. Beware the temporal rift. It consumes all who approach. The warning lingers, heavy and unshakable, as Alara feels the weight of her mission shift. What lies beyond the edge of time? What secrets do these forgotten planets hold, and what price will she and her crew pay to uncover them? This is not just a journey into the unknown. It's a fight for survival against forces that defy the very fabric of reality. Alara stood at the helm of the ship, her eyes fixed on the flickering navigation console. The coordinates for the first forgotten planet, a place shrouded in mystery and rumored to hold secrets older than time itself, were corrupted. Fragments of data blinked erratically across the screen, offering only glimpses of what lay ahead. She turned to her crew, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Recalibrate the navigation systems. We're going to have to work with what we've got. The crew hesitated, their faces reflecting a mix of uncertainty and unease. Venturing blindly into uncharted space was no small risk, but Alara's resolve was unshakable. She made the call, trust the fragmented data, and press forward. It was a decision that spoke to her determination, her belief that the answers they sought were worth the danger. But space, as they would soon learn, is a realm of both wonder and peril. As the ship surged forward, an unexpected gravitational anomaly gripped them, pulling the vessel violently off course. Alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to stabilize the ship. Voices rose in frustration and fear. "This is madness," one crew member shouted. "We should have turned back," another added, their tone laced with doubt. For the first time, Alara's leadership was under scrutiny. Amid the chaos, she remained calm, her focus sharp. She noticed something unusual: shimmering distortions rippling across the viewport. Time itself seemed to warp and bend outside the ship, the fabric of reality twisting in ways that defied explanation. These were no ordinary distortions. They hinted at something far greater, something ancient and powerful. The rift, the very phenomenon they had been seeking, was closer than they realized. Alara's mind raced. The gravitational anomaly, the temporal distortions, they were signs. The forgotten planet was near, but so was the danger. Her decision to press forward had brought them to the edge of discovery, but it had also exposed them to forces beyond their understanding. The crew's faith in her wavered, but Alara knew one thing for certain. They were no longer just explorers. They were trespassers in a realm where the rules of time and space no longer applied. The ship trembled as the anomaly intensified, and the distortions outside grew more pronounced. Alara tightened her grip on the console, her gaze fixed on the swirling void ahead. The rift was calling, and the forgotten planet awaited, but at what cost? The crew's murmurs of doubt echoed in her ears, a stark reminder that leadership in the face of the unknown is never without its trials. The eclipse descended silently through the thick, amber haze of the forgotten planet's atmosphere, its engines humming faintly as it touched down on a surface cloaked in perpetual twilight. The world was eerily still, its pale light casting long shadows over jagged rocks and crumbling structures that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. Alara stepped out first, her boots crunching against the ashen ground, her breath visible in the cold, thin air. Behind her, a small scouting party followed, their helmets glowing faintly in the dim light. The team moved cautiously toward a cluster of ancient ruins, their jagged silhouettes rising like broken teeth against the sky. As they approached, the air grew heavier, as if the ruins themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Inside, the walls were lined with intricate carvings, symbols, and images that told a story older than any of them could comprehend. Alara's breath caught as her flashlight illuminated a massive mural. Its colors faded, but its message still hauntingly clear. It depicted a thriving civilization, their faces filled with hope, only to be swallowed by a swirling void, a rift that consumed everything in its path. The crew stood in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on them. Kale, her second in command, was the first to speak. "This is a warning," he said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with. Pushing further could endanger us all." But Alara shook her head, her eyes fixed on the mural. "This is why we came," she replied, her tone unwavering. "We can't turn back now, not when we're so close to understanding what happened here." The tension between them was palpable. Kale's frustration simmered just beneath the surface, his loyalty to the crew clashing with Alara's relentless drive. "You're risking everything for answers that might not even exist," he argued, stepping closer. "What happens if this rift is still active? What happens if we don't make it back?" Alara turned to face him, her expression resolute. "If we don't find out, no one will. I won't let fear stop us from uncovering the truth." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to challenge her further. As they gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the ruins, a low rumble echoed through the ground, sending a tremor up their legs. The air grew colder, and a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness of the ruins, its form shifting and indistinct, as if it were made of the very twilight that enveloped the planet. The crew froze, their instincts screaming at them to run, but Alara stood her ground, her eyes locked on the figure. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a remnant of the past. It was alive, and it had been waiting for them. The air inside the chamber grew heavier as the figure stepped forward, his voice echoing like a distant storm. "The rift is not just a tear in space," he said, his words carrying the weight of centuries. "It is a force that devours time itself, unraveling entire worlds until they are nothing but memories lost to the void." Alara felt a chill crawl up her spine as his gaze locked onto hers, piercing and unyielding. "If you seek its origin, you must understand what you are up against. But knowledge comes at a price." He extended a hand, his fingers trembling as if burdened by the gravity of his request. "A fragment of your ship's temporal core, Without it, I cannot guide you. The demand hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting. Alara hesitated, her mind racing. The Eclipse's core was the heart of their mission, the key to their survival in the uncharted reaches of space. To give even a piece of it away felt like surrendering a part of their very purpose. Yet the stranger's warning lingered, a haunting reminder of the stakes. Kale's voice cut through the silence, sharp with disbelief. You can't be serious. That core is the only thing keeping us alive out here. Handing it over is madness. His anger was palpable, his fists clenched at his sides. Alara turned to face him, her expression a mix of determination and unease. If we don't stop the rift, she said quietly, there won't be a mission left to protect. This might be our only chance. The tension between them was electric, a silent battle of wills. In the end, Alara made her choice. With a steady hand, she removed a sliver of the core, its light flickering faintly as she handed it to the stranger. As the crew worked to repair the Eclipse, the ship felt different, diminished, as though it had lost a part of its soul. Alara tried to shake the unease, but it clung to her like a shadow. Then the visions began. Flashes of her childhood, moments she had long buried, surfaced unbidden. A laugh shared with her father under a star-filled sky. The day her mother disappeared, leaving behind only questions. These memories felt too vivid, too real, as though the rift itself was reaching into her mind, pulling threads of her past into the present. Alara stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring into the vast expanse of space. The rift's power was growing, its influence seeping into the very fabric of their reality. She could feel it now, a subtle tug, a whisper in the dark. The stranger had given them a clue, but it was cryptic, a riddle wrapped in shadows. As the Eclipse moved forward, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were not just racing against time, but against something far more insidious. The rift was no longer just a threat to the universe. It was becoming a part of them, and with every moment, the line between what was real and what the rift desired grew dangerously thin. The Eclipse hummed softly as it sliced through the void, its course now set toward the next enigmatic world. The survivors' cryptic clue had pointed them in a new direction, but the journey was far from straightforward. As the crew adjusted to the rhythm of the ship, an anomaly appeared on their scanners, a derelict vessel, adrift and eerily silent. Its hull bore the scars of long-forgotten battles, and its engines flickered faintly, caught in a bizarre temporal loop. Time itself seemed to warp around the ship, repeating the same moments endlessly, as if the universe had forgotten to let it move forward. Alara stood at the helm, her sharp eyes scanning the data. "This isn't just a ghost ship," she murmured. "There's life aboard. They're trapped, reliving the same seconds over and over." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Temporal loops were rare and notoriously unpredictable. Kale crossed his arms, his voice firm. "It's a death trap. We don't have the resources or the time to risk it. Every second we spend here, that rift grows stronger." But Alara's resolve was unshakable. "We can't leave them like this," she said. "If we're the only ones who can break the loop, then we have to try." The tension in the room was palpable. The crew split into factions, some siding with Alara's compassion, others with Kale's pragmatism. Ultimately, the decision fell to Alara, and she chose to act. The rescue plan was fraught with danger, a precise maneuver to sync the Eclipse's trajectory with the loop cycle, using the ship's temporal dampeners to create a brief window of stability. One misstep, and they could all be caught in the same endless repetition. As the Eclipse moved into position, the crew held their breath. The ship shuddered violently as it pierced the loop's boundary, alarms blaring as systems strained under the pressure. But Alara's calculations held true. The derelict ship's crew, freed from their temporal prison, was brought aboard the Eclipse. Their gratitude was immediate, but so was their warning. The survivors spoke of the rift in hushed tones, describing it as a living force, a tear in reality that fed on disruption. "It's not just a place," one of them said. "It's a presence, and it's watching you." The revelation deepened the unease aboard the Eclipse. As the rescued survivors integrated with the crew, their stories painted a chilling picture of what lay ahead. But the rift's influence was already making itself known. The Eclipse's systems began to glitch, navigation flickered, sensors gave false readings, and the ship's AI stuttered, as if struggling to process its own thoughts. The crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the ship, but the malfunctions were unlike anything they'd encountered before. It was as if the rift, now aware of their presence, was reaching out to claim them. Alara stood at the observation deck, staring into the void. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her, but she knew they couldn't turn back. The rift was no longer just a destination. It was a challenge, a test of their resolve. And as the Eclipse pressed onward, its crew united by necessity, but divided by fear, the true cost of their mission began to reveal itself. The rift was more than they had bargained for, and its secrets were only just beginning to unfold. The second forgotten planet rises before the crew of the Eclipse like a living tapestry. Its surface, a riot of emerald forests, crystalline rivers, and skies, painted in hues of gold and violet. It's a world that pulses with life, from the towering trees that hum with energy to the creatures that move through the undergrowth with an almost sentient grace. But beauty here is a mask for danger. The moment the crew sets foot on the planet, they are met with hostility. The Inhabitants, a race of fierce, insectoid beings with iridescent carapaces, see the newcomers not as explorers but as invaders. Their war cries echo through the dense jungle, and their weapons, forged from the planet's natural resources, gleam with deadly intent. Alara steps forward, her voice steady but her heart racing. She knows this is a delicate moment, one that could tip the scales toward peace or disaster. She tries to communicate, to explain their purpose, but the language barrier is vast. Every gesture, every word is a gamble. The chieftain of the insectoid race, a towering figure with wings that shimmer like stained glass, watches her with unblinking eyes. There's intelligence there, but also mistrust. Alara realizes that their survival, and the fate of the universe, hinges on her ability to bridge this divide. But as she works to build trust, tensions within her own crew begin to unravel. Kale, ever the skeptic, grows increasingly vocal in his opposition. He sees Alara's diplomacy as a waste of time, a naive attempt to reason with what he calls mindless beasts. Behind her back, he whispers to the crew, sowing doubt about her leadership. His true motives, however, run deeper. Kale has been quietly gathering support. His ambition to take command of the Eclipse now an open secret. The fractures in the crew's unity grow wider, threatening to shatter completely. Amid this turmoil, the crew stumbles upon a discovery that changes everything. Hidden deep within the jungle, shrouded by vines and guarded by the insectoid race, lies an ancient temple. Its walls are carved with symbols that seem to shift and dance in the dim light. At its center rests a device, a crystalline structure that hums with power. It's a relic of unimaginable age, and as Alara studies it, she realizes it holds the key to stabilizing the rift. But there's a catch. The device requires a sacrifice, a life willingly given to activate its power. The revelation sends shockwaves through the crew. Some argue that the sacrifice is too great, that there must be another way. Others, desperate to save the universe, begin to look at one another with uneasy glances. Alara's resolve is tested like never before. She knows what must be done, but the weight of that decision threatens to crush her. Can she ask someone to give their life? Can she make that choice herself? And all the while, Kale watches, his eyes calculating, waiting for the moment to seize control. The lush, vibrant world that once seemed like a sanctuary now feels like a prison. The jungle closes in, the air thick with tension, and the cries of its hostile inhabitants. Alara stands at the precipice, her every decision carrying consequences that ripple across the cosmos. The clock is ticking, and the rift grows wider with each passing moment. The question now is not just whether they can save the universe, but at what cost. Alara stood before the ancient device, her hands trembling as she keyed in the sequence. The air in the chamber grew heavy, almost suffocating, as the machine hummed to life. Lights flickered, and the ground beneath them began to vibrate with an unsettling rhythm. For a moment, it seemed as though the device was working, its energies aligning with the rift, as if unraveling the mysteries of this forgotten world. But then, without warning, the vibrations turned violent. The walls of the chamber cracked, and a deep, thunderous groan echoed from below. The planet's core, destabilized by the device's activation, began to collapse in on itself. The crew scrambled back to the Eclipse, debris raining down around them as the ground split apart. Alara shouted orders, her voice barely audible over the chaos, but the ship's engines roared to life just in time. They barely cleared the atmosphere as the planet imploded behind them, a blinding flash of light marking its final moments. Inside the Eclipse, alarms blared and sparks flew from damaged consoles. The ship had taken a beating, its hull scorched and systems faltering. Kale stormed onto the bridge, his face a mask of fury. He pointed an accusing finger at Alara, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is on you," he hissed. "You pushed us into this madness, and now we're lucky to be alive. You're not fit to lead us." The crew fell silent, their eyes darting between the two. Alara stood her ground, her expression unreadable, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. When she refused to step down, the tension erupted into open defiance. A faction of the crew, led by Kale, declared their loyalty to him, leaving Alara isolated on the bridge. But not everyone turned against her. The survivors they had rescued from the rift, those who had seen and endured horrors beyond comprehension, stood by her side. They had no love for Kale's brash confidence, or his disdain for the unknown. To them, Alara represented hope, a steady hand in a universe that had long since abandoned them. With their support, she managed to hold onto command, but the Eclipse was in no shape to continue their mission. Systems were failing, and the ship limped through the void, its next destination uncertain. As the stars blurred past the cracked view screen, Alara found herself grappling with doubt. Had her relentless pursuit of answers put them all in danger? Was the rift's influence already too deep, twisting their fates in ways she couldn't comprehend? The weight of leadership pressed down on her, heavier than ever. She couldn't shake the feeling that every decision she made from this point forward would determine not just their survival, but the fate of worlds yet to be discovered. The rift's whispers lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that some mysteries were never meant to be unraveled. The Eclipse drifted forward, its damaged hull groaning under the strain. Ahead lay the next destination, a glimmering star system that held both promise and peril. But as Alara stared out into the void, she couldn't shake the question that haunted her. Were they still the masters of their journey, or had the rift already claimed them? Alara's boots crunched against the cracked, desolate surface of the third forgotten planet, a world that seemed to have been forsaken by time itself. The air was thin, almost non-existent, and the ground beneath her feet bore the unmistakable scars of the rift's devastating touch. Jagged fissures stretched across the terrain like veins, glowing faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. Her small team moved cautiously behind her, their breaths visible in the freezing atmosphere, their eyes fixed on the horizon where a massive structure loomed, a monolith of ancient design, towering and ominous. The structure was unlike anything they had encountered before. Its walls were etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive, and the air around it hummed with a low, resonant frequency. Alara knew instinctively that this was no ordinary ruin. It was the key, the gateway to understanding the rift's origin. As they approached, the tension among her team was palpable. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper, as if the planet itself was resisting their presence. Inside, the air grew colder, and the hum intensified, vibrating through their bones. The team followed a series of narrow passages that led deeper into the heart of the structure, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. And then they found it, a portal shimmering and unstable, its edges flickering like a dying flame. It was a doorway, but to where? Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something far greater than they could comprehend. But before they could investigate further, disaster struck. Kale, who had been growing increasingly erratic, revealed his true intentions. In a moment of betrayal, he sabotaged their equipment, sealing the exits and trapping them inside the structure. His voice crackled over their comms, cold and defiant. "You're chasing shadows, Alara. The rift isn't something you can control. It's a force of nature, a reckoning." Alone and cut off from their ship, Alara and her team were forced to confront the grim reality of their situation. As they searched for a way out, Alara stumbled upon something that stopped her in her tracks. A recording device, ancient yet functional, left behind by her predecessor. The voice that emerged from it was hauntingly familiar, filled with regret and urgency. It spoke of a civilization long lost to time, one that had wielded unimaginable power. They had created the rift not as a tool, but as a punishment, a consequence for those who dared to manipulate time itself. The recording ended with a warning. The rift is not a force to be controlled. It is a reminder of our hubris. The weight of the revelation hit Alara like a tidal wave. For years, she had believed her mission was noble, a quest to protect the universe from the rift's chaos. But now, faced with the truth, she couldn't ignore the moral implications. Had she been fighting the wrong battle all along? As the structure groaned around her, its walls seeming to close in, Alara knew that escaping this place was only the beginning. The real challenge would be confronting the choices she had made, and those she had yet to make. The air inside the structure grew heavier as Alara and her team scrambled to escape, their footsteps echoing in the metallic corridors. Behind them, the rift pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its light casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. They barely made it back to the eclipse, but the moment they crossed the threshold, it became clear something was terribly wrong. Time itself seemed to twist and warp around the ship, as though the rift's influence had seeped into their reality. Crew members began to report strange sensations, flashes of memories that didn't belong to them, visions of events that hadn't yet occurred. One engineer swore she'd seen the ship explode in a fiery burst, only to find herself standing in the same spot, unharmed. Another crewmate claimed to remember a conversation that hadn't happened, his voice trembling with confusion. The air grew tense, and paranoia spread like wildfire. Was it the rift's doing, or were their minds unraveling under its influence? Alara stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the rift's swirling light. She could feel its pull, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. The crew's fragmented memories were more than just hallucinations. They were glimpses of potential futures, pieces of timelines that hadn't yet come to pass. And if the rift's power continued to grow, those futures might collide, tearing apart everything they knew. Kale's voice cut through the tension like a blade. This is madness, Alara. We need to get as far away from that thing as possible before it destroys us all. His tone was sharp, his eyes blazing with anger. But beneath it, she could see something else: fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control. Alara turned to face him, her expression steady despite the storm brewing within her. Running won't solve anything, Kale. The rift's influence is spreading. If we don't stop it now, there won't be anywhere left to run. Her words were calm, but they carried the weight of certainty. She knew what had to be done, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The plan was simple, yet unthinkable. To confront the rift directly, she would have to leave the eclipse behind, venturing into the structure once more. But this time, she would go alone. The risk was immense, not just to herself, but to the entire crew. If she failed, the rift would consume them all. Yet staying put would only delay the inevitable. As she prepared to make her move, Kale's mutiny began to take shape. Whispers spread through the crew, some siding with him, others clinging to the hope that Alara's plan might save them. The ship felt like a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Alara's resolve didn't waver. She had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival, it was about leadership, about making the hard choices when no one else could. And as she stood at the edge of the unknown, she realized this was the moment she had been preparing for all along. The rift loomed ahead, its light growing brighter, its pull stronger. The crew's fragmented memories swirled around her, a chaotic tapestry of what could be. But Alara knew one thing for certain: the future wasn't written yet, and she intended to shape it, no matter the cost. As the Eclipse drifted silently through the void, the tension aboard the ship was palpable. Alara stood at the helm of the shuttle bay, her eyes scanning the small team she had carefully chosen for the final mission. Each member carried the weight of uncertainty, their faces etched with a mix of determination and unease. The rift loomed ahead, a swirling abyss of light and shadow that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was their destination, a place where time and space bent in ways no one could fully comprehend. But before they could reach it, the fragile trust aboard the Eclipse shattered. Kale's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. He had gathered his followers, their loyalty unwavering even in the face of the unknown. "This is madness, Alara," he said, stepping forward with a cold intensity. "You're leading us to our deaths. The rift is a trap, and you're too blind to see it." His words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy with accusation. Alara's jaw tightened, but she refused to back down. "We've come too far to turn back now," she replied, her voice steady. "The answers we need are beyond that rift. If you don't want to follow, then stay behind." What followed was chaos. Kale's defiance turned to action as he and his followers attempted to seize control of the Eclipse. The once unified crew fractured into two factions, each side driven by desperation and conviction. The ship's corridors became a battleground, echoing with the sounds of clashing metal and shouted orders. Alara's team fought to hold their ground, but the conflict left the Eclipse damaged, its systems flickering, its hull scarred. In the end, Alara and her team managed to break away, launching their shuttle just as Kale's forces gained the upper hand. But the victory was hollow. Their escape came at a cost: limited resources, dwindling supplies, and the bitter sting of betrayal. As the shuttle hurtled toward the rift, Alara sat in the dimly lit cockpit, her hands resting on the controls. The weight of the mission pressed down on her, heavier than the void outside. She thought of the sacrifices, the lives lost, the trust broken, the bonds strained to their limits. Was it worth it? The question lingered in her mind, unspoken but undeniable. The rift ahead pulsed with an otherworldly energy, a beacon of both hope and dread. Alara's reflection stared back at her from the cockpit window, her face a mask of resolve and doubt. For better or worse, there was no turning back now. The rift awaited, and with it, the answers, or perhaps the end, of everything they had fought for. The shuttle shuddered violently as it crossed the threshold of the rift, its sleek exterior bathed in an otherworldly glow. Outside, the stars seemed to stretch and warp, their light bending into impossible shapes. Inside, the crew felt a strange weightlessness, as if gravity itself had been unmoored. The instruments flickered erratically, their readings nonsensical. They had entered a realm where the rules of physics no longer applied, where time itself seemed to unravel like a thread pulled from a tapestry. Alara gripped the armrests of her seat, her breath quickening as her mind flooded with vivid, disorienting visions. She saw herself as a child, standing at a crossroads, choosing a path that would lead her here. But then, in another flash, she saw a version of herself who had turned away, living a life of quiet obscurity. The visions came faster now, cascading like a waterfall. A timeline where she had never joined the mission, another where she had failed to save her team, and yet another where the universe itself had collapsed into chaos. Each vision carried with it a pang of regret, a lingering question. What if? The rift's labyrinthine corridors stretched endlessly before them, their walls shimmering with an iridescent light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air was thick with tension as the team pressed forward, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The strain of the journey was beginning to show. Commander Voss, usually unflappable, clenched his jaw tightly, his eyes darting nervously at every shadow. Dr. Kale, the team's scientist, muttered under his breath, his hands trembling as he adjusted his scanner. Even Alara's closest ally, Jackson, seemed to be unraveling, his usual humor replaced by a hollow stare. Yet amidst the chaos, Alara found a strange clarity. Her visions, though overwhelming, had sharpened her resolve. She could feel the weight of the rift pressing down on her, but she refused to let it crush her. "We have to keep moving," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. Her determination became a lifeline for the others, pulling them forward when their own strength faltered. As they neared the rift's core, the air grew heavier, charged with an energy that made their skin prickle. The walls of the corridor began to shift, morphing into scenes from their pasts, moments of joy, loss, triumph, and failure. It was as if the rift was taunting them, forcing them to confront the choices that had brought them here. Alara paused, her gaze lingering on a vision of her mother, smiling warmly in a memory from long ago. For a moment, she wavered, her resolve flickering like a candle in the wind. But then, they reached it, the heart of the rift. A vast, open space stretched before them, its center occupied by a figure that defied description. It was neither solid nor fluid, neither light nor shadow. Its voice, when it spoke, echoed not in the air but in their minds, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. "I am the architect of this place," it said, its words carrying the weight of eons. "You stand at the threshold of a choice that will shape the fate of all existence. Destroy the rift, and the universe will continue as it is, flawed, fragile, and finite. Or harness its power and rewrite the very fabric of reality. The choice is yours, but know this: every decision carries consequences, and every consequence ripples across the stars." The team stood in stunned silence, the magnitude of the choice before them sinking in. Alara felt the weight of the rift pressing down on her shoulders, but also a flicker of something else: hope. She turned to her team, her eyes meeting theirs one by one. In that moment, they were no longer just a crew. They were a family, bound together by shared trials and unspoken trust. The rift's creator waited, its form shifting and undulating like a living question. The decision rested with them, but the path ahead was anything but clear. As the shimmering rift pulsed before her, its light casting strange shadows across the ancient chamber, Alara felt the weight of the being's offer settle heavily on her shoulders. The promise was intoxicating, a chance to rewrite history, to undo every loss, every mistake, every heartbreak. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine it, a universe where her crew had never suffered, where she could erase the scars of their journey. But then, like a cold wave washing over her, the truth struck. To rewrite history would mean erasing not just the pain, but the courage, the growth, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of adversity. It would mean denying the sacrifices of her crew, the lessons learned through hardship, and the very essence of who they had become. With a resolve that burned brighter than the rift itself, Alara turned to the being, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "No," she said, her words echoing through the chamber. "We've earned this story. Every scar, every loss, it's ours, and I won't let you take that from us." The being's form twisted in anger, its voice a roar of frustration that reverberated through the air. "You cling to your pain like it's a prize," it sneered. "But pain is all you'll ever know if you refuse me." In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos as the being unleashed a final wave of temporal distortions, warping time and space into a nightmarish labyrinth. Alara shouted orders to her team, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay close. We move together." The distortions twisted the chamber into a maze of shifting walls and collapsing pathways, but the crew moved as one, their trust in Alara unshakable. Every step forward was a battle against time itself, as the rift's instability grew, threatening to tear the fabric of reality apart. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath them trembled as if the planet itself was screaming in protest. As they fought their way closer to the core, the rift's pull grew stronger, its light blinding and its power overwhelming. Alara could feel the weight of leadership pressing down on her harder than ever. She turned to her team, their faces etched with fear and determination, and knew she had to find the words to carry them through. "We've faced impossible odds before," she said, her voice firm yet filled with warmth. "This is no different. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every choice we've made, every moment that brought us here. And I know, together, we can do this." Her words ignited a spark in her crew, their resolve hardening as they pushed forward. The rift's core loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of light and shadow, its instability threatening to consume everything. Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing with the enormity of what lay ahead. This was the moment that would define them not just as explorers, but as a family forged in the fires of the unknown. And as the temporal distortions closed in, Alara steeled herself for the final push, knowing that the true test of leadership wasn't just about making the hard choices, it was about inspiring others to stand beside you, no matter how impossible the odds. As Alara approached the heart of the rift, the air seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, a low, resonant vibration that echoed through her very bones. Before her stood a towering device, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, as though alive. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a machine of ancient design, radiating both power and fragility. This was the key to stabilizing the rift, a tool capable of restoring balance or sealing it forever. But as she studied the controls, a chilling realization settled over her. The device demanded more than just skill or knowledge to activate. It required a sacrifice of life. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than the gravity of 1,000 worlds. Alara knew what had to be done. Her team, her friends were counting on her. She couldn't ask any of them to make this choice. It had to be her. When she finally turned to face them, her voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. "I have to stay," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. The device needs a life force to activate. It's the only way to close the rift. The shock that rippled through the team was palpable. Voices rose in protest. Hands reached out to stop her, but Alara held firm. "This isn't just about us," she said, her tone softening. "It's about every planet, every civilization out there that could be destroyed if we don't act. I can't let that happen." Her resolve was unshakable, and though their hearts ached, they knew she was right. With a final, solemn nod, Alara turned back to the device. Her hands moved with precision, guided by instinct and the faint whispers of the forgotten civilization that had built it. As the machine began to hum louder, the rift shuddered, its chaotic energy swirling violently. The team, hearts heavy but determined, began their retreat, each step a battle against the pull of the collapsing rift. They wouldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. They had to survive, for her, for the mission, for the countless lives that depended on them. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, the rift began to fold in on itself, the light fading into a deep, impenetrable darkness. Alara stood at the center, her figure silhouetted against the dying light. And then, in a flash of brilliance, it was over. The rift was sealed, the danger gone. But the cost was immeasurable. Back on the shuttle, the team sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling over them like a shroud. They had succeeded, but the victory was bittersweet. Alara's sacrifice had saved them all, but her absence left a void that no amount of triumph could fill. As the shuttle sped away from the now quiet edge of the galaxy, they vowed to honor her memory, carrying her courage and selflessness with them, always. The shuttle shuddered violently as it burst through the collapsing rift, its engines sputtering from the strain. Outside the viewport, the infinite expanse of deep space stretched endlessly, cold and silent. Alara gripped the control panel, her knuckles white, scanning the void for any sign of the eclipse. But there was nothing. No ship, no debris, no trace of their once mighty vessel. The realization hit like a punch to the chest. They were stranded, adrift in the vast unknown, with only the faint hum of the shuttle's failing systems to break the eerie quiet. Resources were dwindling fast. The oxygen recyclers were struggling, and the food reserves wouldn't last more than a few days. Every breath, every moment, felt like a countdown to the inevitable. Alara's team worked tirelessly to stabilize the shuttle, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. She could see it in their eyes, the weight of their situation, the gnawing doubt that they might never make it back. And yet, amidst the chaos, her mind kept drifting to those they'd lost. The faces of her crewmates, their laughter, their sacrifices, all of it haunted her. They had won, but at what cost? As the hours stretched into days, Alara found herself grappling with the weight of leadership. She had always been the one to keep the team together, to inspire hope even in the darkest moments. But now, with the odds stacked impossibly high, even her resolve began to waver. She replayed every decision, every choice that had led them here. Could she have done more? Could she have saved the others? The questions gnawed at her, threatening to pull her under. Then, just as despair threatened to consume them, a faint signal flickered on the shuttle's communication panel. At first, Alara thought it was a trick of the mind, a glimmer of false hope, but it persisted, a weak, intermittent pulse, that could only mean one thing. The Eclipse, somewhere out there in the vast emptiness, the ship, or what was left of it, was still transmitting. And if the ship was alive, then maybe, just maybe, Kale and the rest of the crew were too. Elara's heart raced as she locked onto the signal. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a lifeline in the darkness. Her crew gathered around her, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and disbelief. This wasn't just a chance to survive. It was a chance to reclaim what they'd lost, to bring their family back together. And as Alara stared out into the endless void, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in days. Determination. They had come too far to give up now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The signal was calling, and they would answer. The shuttle's engines hummed back to life, a sound that brought a flicker of hope to Alara and her team. They traced the faint signal through the void, their path lit by the eerie glow of distant stars. When they finally reached the source, the sight that greeted them was both haunting and sobering. The Eclipse, once a symbol of defiance, now drifted aimlessly, its hull scarred and broken. The rebellion had been crushed, not by Alara's hand, but by the unforgiving power of the rift itself. Inside the derelict ship, they found Kale and his followers, barely clinging to life. The once proud leader now looked frail, his confidence shattered by the consequences of his choices. The rift had proven too vast, too incomprehensible, and the rebellion's failure was a stark reminder of the hubris that had driven them. Alara stood before him, her emotions a tempest of anger, pity, and something else she couldn't quite name. The crew waited in tense silence, their eyes fixed on her. This was her moment, a decision that would define not just her leadership, but the future of their fractured group. Kale had betrayed them, endangered them, and nearly doomed them all. Justice demanded that he face the full weight of his actions. Yet, as she looked at him, weakened and defeated, another thought stirred within her: mercy. It wasn't a word she had expected to cross her mind, but there it was, quiet yet insistent. Alara's choice to forgive him was not an easy one. It surprised even her, a leader who had always prided herself on her pragmatism. But in that moment, she realized that holding on to anger would only deepen the divisions among her crew. By extending a hand to Kale, she wasn't just saving him. She was beginning to heal the wounds that had torn them apart. The decision rippled through the group, sparking a fragile but growing sense of unity. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crew began to see themselves not as individuals at odds, but as a team bound by shared purpose and resilience. Alara's act of compassion didn't erase the past, but it opened the door to a future where trust could be rebuilt, one step at a time. As they prepared to leave the Eclipse behind, Alara couldn't help but wonder if this was the true test of leadership, not just the ability to make hard decisions, but the courage to choose kindness in the face of betrayal. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a quiet strength that would guide her through whatever lay ahead. The Eclipse hummed softly as it glided through the void, its engines restored and its course set for Earth. But the stars ahead were not the same as those they had left behind. The collapse of the rift had fractured time itself, leaving behind shimmering pockets of distortion, temporal anomalies that warped space in unpredictable ways. Each one was a reminder of the cost of their mission, a silent echo of the chaos they had unleashed. Alara stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of light and shadow that loomed ahead. The weight of command pressed heavily on her shoulders, heavier now than ever before. The crew had endured so much: loss, betrayal, the unraveling of reality itself. And yet they had survived. But survival, she knew, was only the beginning. The scars they carried were not just physical, they were etched deep into their minds and hearts. Trust, once unshakable, now felt fragile, like a thread stretched too thin. As the Eclipse approached the first anomaly, alarms blared and the ship shuddered violently. The crew scrambled to stabilize their trajectory, their movements sharp and precise, but their eyes betrayed the unease that lingered beneath the surface. Alara's voice cut through the chaos, steady and calm, a beacon of reassurance in the storm. She directed them with the same confidence that had carried them through the rift, but even she could feel the cracks forming in her resolve. The anomalies were not just a threat to their ship, they were a mirror, reflecting the fractures within the crew. Arguments flared over minor decisions, old grievances resurfaced, and the strain of their journey began to wear them down. Alara knew that unity was their only chance of making it home, but unity was a fragile thing, easily shattered. She worked tirelessly to rebuild the bonds that had once held them together, offering words of encouragement, mediating disputes, and leading by example. Yet, with each passing day, the toll of her sacrifices grew heavier. In quiet moments, when the ship was silent and the stars seemed to hold their breath, Alara allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. The lives lost, the choices made, the cost of leadership, it all pressed down on her like a star, collapsing in on itself. She had given so much of herself to keep them alive, and yet she wondered if it would ever be enough. The anomalies were a reminder that the universe was vast and unforgiving, and that even the strongest among them could be broken. But Alara was not broken. Not yet. As the Eclipse emerged from the anomaly, battered but intact, she turned to her crew, her voice steady despite the storm within. "We've faced worse," she said, her words carrying the weight of everything they had endured. "And we'll face whatever comes next together." It was a promise, a plea, and a reminder, not just to them, but to herself. The journey home was far from over, but as long as they stood together, they had a chance. And in the vastness of space, where time itself could unravel, that chance was enough. As the ship drifted closer to the edge of known space, the crew spotted a faint glimmer of light in the distance. It grew brighter with each passing moment, resolving into the unmistakable silhouette of a fleet ships sent to search for them, their engines glowing like tiny suns against the void. Relief washed over the crew, but it was a quiet kind of relief, tinged with the weight of all they had endured. Among them, Alara stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the approaching fleet. She had done what no one else could: close the rift, saved countless lives, and brought her crew home. Yet, as the fleet hailed her as a hero, she felt anything but triumphant. The cost of victory lingered in her mind like a shadow. Lives had been lost, friends, comrades, people who had entrusted her with their safety. The rift's destruction had come at a price, and Alara couldn't shake the feeling that she had traded one kind of destruction for another. The crew, too, felt the weight of their journey. Their return was bittersweet, marked by quiet moments of mourning and reflection. They had ventured into the unknown and returned forever changed, carrying with them the scars of what they had seen and done. As the fleet escorted them back to civilization, Alara made a decision that would ripple far beyond their ship. She chose to share the truth about the rift, its origins, and the ancient civilization that had once thrived at the edge of time. Her revelations sparked a debate that spread like wildfire across the stars. Some hailed her as a visionary, while others questioned the wisdom of delving into such dangerous knowledge. Humanity's place in the universe was suddenly up for discussion, and the questions it raised were as vast as the cosmos itself. Should they continue to explore, knowing the risks, or should they retreat, content with the worlds they already knew? Alara's actions had opened a door, and while some feared what lay beyond it, others saw an opportunity, a chance to redefine humanity's destiny among the stars. The debate set the stage for a new era of exploration, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. And as the crew stepped off their ship and back into the light of familiar skies, they couldn't help but wonder if their journey had truly ended, or if it had only just begun. The air hung heavy with stillness as Alara approached the memorial, a towering spire of blackened steel, etched with the names of those who had journeyed with her into the void. Each name was a story, a life that had once pulsed with dreams and fears, now silent beneath the weight of eternity. Her fingers brushed lightly over the cold surface, pausing at the names of those who had stood by her side, and those who had turned against her. The betrayal still stung, but time had softened its edges, revealing a deeper truth. The cost of leadership was not measured in victories or conquests, but in the lives intertwined with her own. She stood there, dwarfed by the monument, her thoughts tracing the arc of their journey, the sacrifices made, the battles fought, the stars they had dared to touch. It all came rushing back. Yet in this quiet moment, it wasn't the triumphs that lingered in her mind. It was the faces of those who had fallen, their laughter, their fears, their hopes. It was the weight of their trust, the burden of their choices, and the quiet courage they had shown even in the face of despair. Leadership, she realized, was not about commanding obedience or charting a flawless course. It was about carrying the weight of others' lives, about making decisions that would ripple through the cosmos long after she was gone. It was about understanding that every choice came with a price, and that price was often paid in blood and tears. But it was also about hope, about daring to believe that the journey was worth the cost, even when the path was shrouded in uncertainty. As she turned away from the memorial, a faint breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the faint hum of the ship's engines. Her crew stood waiting, their eyes fixed on her with a quiet resolve. They had followed her into the unknown before, and now, once again, they were ready. There was no grand speech, no rallying cry, only the unspoken understanding that their journey was far from over. The universe still held mysteries, and they were determined to uncover them together. Elara stepped forward, her heart heavy yet strangely light. The weight of the past would always be with her, but it no longer defined her. The stars called, and she would answer not out of duty or ambition, but out of a quiet, unyielding belief that the unknown was worth exploring, no matter the cost. And as the ship's engines roared to life, carrying them once more into the vast expanse, she knew that the true legacy of leadership was not in the destination, but in the lives that chose to follow, united by a shared purpose and an unbreakable bond. As the Eclipse glides silently through the void, its engines humming with quiet determination, The crew reflects on the extraordinary journey that brought them here. Each member carries the weight of what they've seen: planets shrouded in mystery, civilizations lost to time, and the haunting beauty of the cosmos at its most enigmatic. Yet, despite the challenges, there's a newfound sense of purpose that binds them together. Alara, standing tall at the helm, feels the weight of the ship's controls in her hands, a reminder of the responsibility she now bears as their leader. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, scan the horizon of stars ahead, each one a beacon of possibility. The forgotten planets they encountered may no longer exist in the physical realm, but their echoes linger in the minds of the crew. These worlds, once vibrant and alive, have left an indelible mark, teaching them lessons about resilience, curiosity, and the unyielding spirit of exploration. As the Eclipse charts its course toward uncharted territories, the crew carries forward not just the memories of what they've lost, but the hope of what they might yet discover. The universe, vast and infinite, offers no guarantees, but it promises something far more valuable: endless potential. In the quiet moments aboard the ship, the crew finds solace in their shared mission. They face the unknown and emerge stronger, their bonds forged in the crucible of the cosmos. As the Eclipse vanishes into the star-strewn expanse, it becomes more than just a vessel. It's a symbol of humanity's enduring quest to understand, to explore, and to dream. The journey beyond the edge of time has changed them, but it has also reminded them of something profound: that even in the face of the infinite, the human spirit remains unbroken. The final scene lingers on the ship as it fades into the distance, a tiny speck against the backdrop of the universe. It's a moment of quiet triumph, a testament to the courage it takes to venture into the unknown. The forgotten planets may be gone, but their legacy endures, carried forward by those who dare to seek the answers hidden among the stars. And as the Eclipse continues its voyage, the crew knows one thing for certain: their story is far from over. The universe is vast, and the possibilities are endless.